History is not what we are taught to remember. It is what survives. Pause. Every empire leaves behind monuments, statues, books, official records, but those are not the full story. Pause. Because history does not begin with heroes, it begins with decisions, quiet ones. Decisions made late at night behind locked doors when no one was supposed to be listening. Pause. What you are about to hear was never meant to be shared. It was buried. Not because it was insignificant, but because it was dangerous. Pause. There are moments in history when a single choice changes everything. Borders laws lives. Most people never learn about these moments. They are taught the version that feels safe, clean, simple, comfortable. Pause. But the truth is rarely comfortable and almost never simple. Pause. Empires are not built by courage alone. They are built by fear, by silence, by choices made when morality becomes inconvenient. Pause. This story does not come from legend. It comes from fragments, letters that disappeared, orders that were never signed, witnesses who were silenced. Pause. For generations, this chapter was ignored, not forgotten, ignored. Pause. Because acknowledging it would raise questions about power, about obedience, about how easily ordinary people can become part of something dark. Pause. Tonight, we are not looking at dates or famous names. We are looking at a moment when history took a turn most people were never meant to see. Pause. And once you understand this moment, you begin to notice something unsettling. The past does not stay in the past. It lingers, watching, waiting. The experiment did not begin in secrecy. It began in offices, in meeting rooms, with paperwork, with approvals. Pause. It was conducted by people with titles, with credentials, with authority. Doctors, researchers, government officials. Pause. The institution behind it was not a shadow organization. It was respected, funded, trusted. Pause. They believed the goal was justified, to observe, to understand, to control. Pause. The participants were told very little. They were promised care, treatment, protection. Pause. But the real purpose was never explained because full transparency would have raised objections. Pause. Internal documents later revealed that concerns were expressed quietly, briefly, and then dismissed. Pause. The experiment moved forward not because everyone agreed, but because no one stopped it. Pause. And that silence became part of the method. The individuals involved were not unknown figures. Some were leaders in their fields, others were administrators who never met the participants. Pause. Responsibility was divided. Decisions were fragmented. So no single person felt fully accountable. Pause. One researcher handled data, another approved procedures, another signed reports. Pause. Each role seemed small, manageable, harmless. Pause. But together they formed a system that allowed harm to continue. Pause. Years passed. The experiment continued long after it should have ended. Pause. New evidence emerged. Warnings became clearer, but stopping it would have meant admitting failure. Pause. And institutions do not easily admit failure. Pause. So the study remained active, not because it was successful, but because it was inconvenient to shut it down. As time passed, the results became impossible to ignore. Pause. The data showed harm, clear patterns, consistent damage. Pause. But these findings were not shared publicly. They were stored, reclassified, delayed. Pause. Reports were rewritten. Language was softened. Risks were described as inconclusive. Pause. The most troubling outcomes were removed entirely. Pause. Not destroyed, just misplaced. Pause. Inside the institution, there was awareness. People knew, but knowledge does not always lead to action. Pause. Releasing the truth would have consequences for funding, for reputations, for careers. Pause. So the story remained incomplete. The public saw progress. The internal records showed something else. Pause. This was no longer research, it was damage control. Pause. And the longer it continued, the harder it became to stop. The truth did not surface all at once, it leaked. Pause. Through documents, through testimonies, through people who could no longer stay silent. Pause. Journalists began asking questions. Historians followed the paper trail. Pause. What they found did not match the official narrative. Pause. There were inconsistencies, contradictions, missing explanations. Pause. Public pressure increased. Investigations were launched. Pause. And for the first time, the institution was forced to respond. Pause. Internal files were released. Memos, meeting notes, unsent warnings. Pause. Together they revealed a pattern, not of ignorance, but of avoidance. Pause. The story that emerged was far darker than anyone expected. Pause. And once it became public, there was no way to return it to silence. The apology came decades later. Pause. Not during the experiment, not when harm was first discovered, but long after the damage was done. Pause. It was delivered by a senior official on behalf of the institution. Pause. The words were careful, measured. Pause. They acknowledged mistakes. They expressed regret. They accepted responsibility. Pause. But they did not undo the past. Pause. The statement spoke of ethics, of lessons learned, of reforms implemented. Pause. It recognized the suffering, at least in words. Pause. For some, the apology was overdue. For others, it was insufficient. Pause. Because an apology cannot restore trust. It can only admit that trust was broken. Pause. And in this case, it had been broken for a very long time. This story is not just history, it is a warning. Pause. The institutions still exist, the systems remain. Pause. Rules have changed, oversight has improved, but the conditions that allowed this to happen have not disappeared. Pause. Fear, pressure, silence. Pause. They still shape decisions. Pause. That is why this story matters. Not because it is shocking, but because it is possible. Pause. Every generation believes it would act differently, that it would notice, that it would intervene. Pause. History suggests otherwise. Pause. The past does not repeat itself exactly, but it often rhymes. Pause. And once you recognize the pattern, you begin to see it everywhere. Pause. The question is no longer what happened then. Pause. The question is, what will happen next?